Welcome to this episode of Kill the Cat, where we're discussing the 2007 musical fantasy film Enchanted, directed by Kevin Lima with screenplay by Billy Kelly and starring one of our favourites, Amy Adams. We're going to be looking at how Enchanted makes use of its comic premise, a comedy technique detailed in Steve Kaplan's book The Hidden Tools of Comedy, which you can find a link for in the show notes. As always, spoilers ahead, but otherwise, on with the episode.
Once upon a time, there was a movie called Enchanted.
A brilliant movie starring one of our favourite actresses, Amy Adams, who we've talked about on this podcast before in Arrival.
Yeah, a very, very different performance.
Very different performance. We are talking about the idea of the comic premise, which you're going to touch on, and basically how this movie kind of exemplifies it. Enchanted, a really underrated movie.
So good. It's actually one of my all-time favourite feel-good movies. It's one of those movies where it's like, do you want to watch Enchanted? The answer is always yes. I love it every time. So the idea behind doing Enchanted was I was reading a book called The Hidden Tools of Comedy, The Serious Art of Being Funny by Steve Kaplan. And he has an entire chapter dedicated to something called comic premise. So Kaplan describes comic premise as a lie that imagines an impossible or improbable world that could never happen, but what would happen next. So in the book, he uses Groundhog Day and Big, his two ongoing examples. So Groundhog Day, a bitter news reporter is forced to relive the same day over and over again, and Big is about a 13-year-old boy who wakes up in the body of a full-grown man. So both of these premises are lies. Neither can happen. And then he goes on to say, once the premise is established, you can't tell another lie. And that was really the thing in the book that grabbed me and made me think about comedy in a whole different way. So you can tell one big lie, but after that, you have to develop the story honestly, organically, and truthfully, which Enchanted does amazingly. So we are going to talk about that today.
Yeah, so the comic premise of Enchanted, I think you have a much better way. Your experience with log lines has meant you can summarize this much better than I can. But what did you have down for that?
I've done so much script coverage, guys. On the day of her wedding, a naive fairy tale princess is sent to the harsh and loveless world of New York by a wicked stepmother. So that was my logline for Enchanted. So this is the lie of Enchanted. There is no fairy tale world, and there are no fairy tale princesses, and cartoons can't come to life. That we know of.
Who knows?
Who knows? It's 2020. Anything could happen. But it's 2020, so we wouldn't get Disney princesses.
Predictions for December.
We'd get like Jafar and Scar and Maleficent.
Yeah.
So that happens. Once that happens, everything else has to be honest. This is what Enchanted does so well, and it's the biggest mistake I see in comedy. Scripts I have to read and give feedback on is that writers trying to do comedy think that all their characters have to be funny all the time. They don't. They do not have to be funny. They just have to be honest in a good premise. So that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, so the idea of like being honest over trying to be funny. One of the things I love about the background for this film is Amy Adams. Her performance is brilliant. She
She's
nails
so good
it.
in this.
One of the things that she does really well is she's very genuine to the character of Gisele. And Gisele is a very genuine character, and she stays very honest throughout the movie. She's a fairy tale princess, and she's wound up in New York. So she only does things that a fairy tale princess who's wound up in New York would do. She calls on animals when she needs help cleaning. She gets vermin, and she's like, oh, well, it's nice to make new friends sometimes. Kevin Lima, who's the director of the movie, he talks about in a number of interviews actually going through the casting process and trying to find the perfect person to play Gisele, because it is a complicated character. And she is like, how do you cast for that and find someone who can play it honestly, and not in a way that's just trying to be funny, right? Because you can make a comedy where you're just trying to tell jokes all the time and every character is just trying to one-up the other one in being funny. That always ends up not being that funny. But he talks about Amy Adams came in and was one of the few actresses who didn't become self-aware about the movie, didn't go, oh, this character's really ridiculous, or point out how over-the-top Gisele was. She just approached Gisele as a character and as a real person to be acted. And that for Kevin is what allowed Amy Adams to take the role, because Gisele was a sincere character for her. And I think that speaks to sort of the approach you have to have for performing in this kind of movies. In a comedy that has a comic premise like this, like, you need to be honest.
Yeah, so often I see characters in comedies, they're given the most ridiculous things. They're given funny, like, ways of talking or ways of moving. A lot of it's very slapstick. You don't need that. So one scene I had, for an example, is when Gisele first arrives in New York. There is a bad version of this scene where she trips and stumbles over her dress and runs around and starts screaming because that's what the writer or the performer thinks is funny. Here's the thing. She's in the middle of Times Square. She's in the ridiculous dress, the amazing wedding dress. That's all you need. And then all she needs to do from there is react honestly to that situation. The dress itself is funny just in its how big it is and how much of an obstacle it becomes for her. She calls a little person grumpy. Yeah.
One interesting thing with the dress, though, is that she doesn't, like, trip over the dress. She's not falling over on the high heels, because she's quite, as a princess, or, you know, I don't know if she's officially a princess, but as a princess character, she's fine to wear a dress. Actually, the stuff she reacts to is New York itself. So she meets a little person and calls him grumpy because that's her context.
Yeah, and later she needs advice, so she seeks a homeless man. Because in her world, all homeless men are nice, wise folk. And instead he steals her tiara because it's New York.
You are not a very nice man.
And this is how Amy Adams performs, and this is how the character is written throughout the film. Everything she does, making dresses out of the curtains, falling off the castle. I'm doing air quotes, you can't see me because it's a podcast. When she's naked in the shower and totally unaware, drinking the fish in the office. It's all honest reactions to a fairy tale character in New York.
And we find out later, you know, like, his wife had left him, and which on its own I think is such a great way to address that situation. The classic thing here to do would be, oh, the wife died, but actually in this case the wife left. And that's so much more dramatically interesting. That's such a... Robert kind of represents everything that is not Gisele. He is cynical, and we find out later, you know, like, his wife had left him, and which on its own I think is such a great way to address... The classic thing here to do would be, oh, the wife died, but actually in this case the wife left. And that's so much more dramatically interesting. It's a more interesting character choice for Robert, and I think it justifies kind of who he has become, in that he's quite cynical. He doesn't believe in love. He doesn't want Morgan to get swept up in fairy tales, because he did, and he got hurt by it. And he deals with divorces. And you've got Gisele, who comes into his life, who had met a guy the day before and was ready to get married, you know, whereas Robert has been with Nancy for 5 years and still struggles to kind of show that he loves her. How does she know that you love her, Robert? How does she know?
There's a whole song about it.
He's a very good choice of character to go up against Gisele. And I think that's another part of, like, if you want to get comedy, have characters that are going to conflict, but they don't have to conflict as, like, protagonists, antagonists. They can just conflict in a way of, like, the two people trying to reconcile the fact that they have very different views on love, very different views on marriage, very different views on the world.
And that leads to comedic situations. For example, we talked about when Giselle's in the shower, and of course it's at that moment where Nancy decides to come round and Gisele is wrapped only in a towel. And there's that amazing line of, like, she thinks we kissed, and she's so horrified. Nancy's a really another clever choice for this, because I think the obvious thing to do for Nancy, the fiance from The Parent Trap, the Lindsay Lohan movie, comes to mind, and just having, like, this really awful, like, bitchy woman who, of course, like, Robert should dump her for Gisele, but she's not.
No.
Because why would Robert date someone like that? It's not honest. So we see Nancy opposite of Gisele as well. She's very practical. When we meet her, she's beautiful, but in a very modern, put together way. She looks like she's dressed for work, trying to connect with Morgan for some grown-up girl bonding time, which is a clever line, because that's not what Morgan needs. She needs to hang out with Gisele, the Disney princess, and she needs to be a kid, not a grown-up just yet.
So what about some of the other characters in this?
Yeah, so Gisele is not the only cartoon set to New York. We get 4 more. We get Prince Edward, Queen Nerissa, Chip, and Nathaniel.
Yeah.
So I think Prince Edward is probably actually the best example of a character very tempting to just make funny and ridiculous. And he is, but he's not trying to be.
No.
He is acting completely honestly to the situation around him.
Yeah. I think he is a little bit dumber than Gisele, and so you can forgive him being a bit sillier. And I think it adds, like, you know, it is a kid's movie. It's going to be a little bit silly. I quite like Nathaniel. I really like that there's sort of the bumbling minion who actually becomes self-aware by the end. You don't see that, like LeFou in Beauty and the Beast doesn't go through that arc, but he's a very similar kind of character. Yeah, I quite like Nathaniel's arc as well, even though it's kind of separate to what's happening in the story. It's him kind of realizing he's worthy of being respected and actually
that's
receiving
whole arc.
a healthy form of love.
Which kind of ties into the whole theme of like what is love and what is a good relationship.
Yeah. Nerissa is the sort of most cartoony character, I think mostly because she comes in the last act and she gets to maintain her powers in the real New York. Though Gisele does too, I think Nerissa is a more powerful character in terms of magic. And Chip is just a lot of fun.
Chip is fun. Chip the Chipmunk.
Yeah.
But even like Chip, who is a CGI chipmunk. And like they do have extended sequences where he's like doing the charades and Edward's trying to guess. It's all plot relevant though. At no point does this movie stop and do a comedic bit. Everything is driving character and plot. I think one of the best examples I had for that, there's a scene where Edward's in like this motel room watching TV, which he calls a magic box,
the magic mirror.
Yeah, he's like, oh, there's a magic mirror. And I think it would be very tempting, and maybe this was even in like an earlier draft, to wonder, oh, what's he watching on TV? How can we make that funny? But no, it's just the news. There's the soap opera that Nathaniel gets to see for his character, and then there's the news that leads Edward to Gisele.
Yeah.
And Edward going, thank you, magic mirror, and giving it a kiss. That's enough.
Yeah.
We don't need the whole comedy bit of what is he watching on TV.
So everyone has to be honest. Nathaniel has to be honest in that he is trying to impress Nerissa, but he's also wrestling with his own sort of insecurities and actually comes to a point where he grows past that. That's the end of his arc, is he actually calls Nerissa out and tells everyone that she had poisoned Gisele. Edward is trying to find his love, and you know, when he comes and finally finds Gisele, he sings to the duet, but Gisele doesn't sing back to him because she's actually starting the process of going on her arc, in that she wants to have a date with him for the first time. He spent longer trying to rescue her than he has known her.
That's very true.
Yeah. Morgan is, you know, just like she has a Disney princess around, like what little girl isn't going to love that?
Yeah, and Morgan serves the purpose of, I think without Morgan, Gisele would seem very ridiculous. But because, well, she does a little bit, but because Morgan is there and Morgan is so enchanted by her, and sees the real Gisele, who is a very kind, sweet, caring person, which are very common personality traits of the classic Disney princesses, who are Snow White, Cinderella, and Sleeping Beauty, and elements of all three of those princesses find their way into this film. And that's the Gisele Robert will eventually come to know as well.
Yeah, and I think Morgan also serves the purpose of, like, she is kind of the reason that Gisele is able to stay around Robert for so long. Like, she's the reason they even meet each other, because Morgan gets out of the car when she sees Gisele up on the roof. One of the great things in terms of the world building there is, you know, the comparing of like Prince Edward catching Gisele and then Robert completely failing. Do you remember how it's written in the script? It's quite...
it's very, well, this is an amazing screenplay to read, by the way. It's so much fun to read. But in the beginning, she's falling off a tree after being attacked by a troll, and the screenplay is like, she has 5 fingers, then 4, 3, 2, 1, and now she's falling. But the prince catches her. It's really campy. It's so much fun. And then when Robert does it, you can't catch a person falling off a building like that. One of the ongoing kind of like comic bits in this movie is that cartoon rules don't apply.
Yeah.
And that's definitely what we see here. And he catches her. And the line is, "Is this a habit of yours, falling off stuff?" And she says, "Oh, usually there's someone around to catch me."
I think it can't be understated how important it is to have the character to react to this. Like, we need someone to empathize with to kind of be our proxy within the movie world. When you think of the movie, the funny character, in terms of the main two characters, in terms of Gisele and Robert, the funny character will probably initially seem to be Gisele, because she's the one who's she doesn't fit in the world. She's doing the silly stuff. But actually, I think the character who makes us laugh the most is Robert, because we laugh when he gets caught in an awkward situation because of Gisele. We laugh when he is reacting, and when he reacts, we get given that permission to laugh. And I think, whether the world is on Robert's side and is kind of matching Robert in terms of it being a serious world, like when he's at work, and Gisele is kind of almost seeming insane, or when the world is against him and everything around him seems insane, like during some of the songs, and like when the animals come into his house, he is the one who gives us the permission to laugh, because he is the one who replaces us within the movie. And it's important to know when you're writing comedy, the straight character is just as important as the goofy character. And I think it's important to make sure that your straight character, and when I say straight character, I mean the character who is of the world, who is kind of played straight. We'll talk a little bit more, but you could also have straight meaning sort of the character who plays truest to themselves.
Which I'll talk a little bit about in a sec. But
in this sense, Robert is the straight character. There's so many movies that do the sort of, all the characters are the silly character and everyone is being the comic relief. You get a bunch of comedians together and they just kind of go into their scenes and riff. These movies fall flat because the actors are jumping between playing the straight character and the goofy character, and that's not honest because they're not staying the same person. They're each trying to just be the funniest character in scene to scene. And you lose your honesty and you lose all sort of merit that your story might have had because there's nothing consistent. So why should anyone trust your themes or what you're trying to say with the story? Even in sketch comedy, which is, about a bunch of people improvising and riffing and, trying not to break character and not to laugh, it will fall flat if you don't have a straight character to react with. All the greats have the straight character. When you watch like Fry and Laurie or the two Ronnies, one of them,
Costello.
Yeah. Even like Monty Python often has a straight character. They're absurdists, so I think they get away. Like if you my mind goes to sort of the Holy Grail, and everyone's a little bit silly, but the king kind of is often the one who's playing the straight character. And like looking at even modern things like SNL, a lot of their good sketches, one character is straight and the rest might be silly. It's so important to have that straight character as a regular main character that carries through the whole story so that we always have someone as an audience to relate to, because we can't just relate to the world watching a number of silly characters.
Yeah, so there's a John Cleese quote that sums this up nicely, which he says, "We used to think that comedy was watching someone do something silly. We came to realize that comedy was watching somebody watch somebody do something silly." So just to make things confusing, Kaplan refers to this as Straight's wavy line. But when he says the straight line, he means the Gisele character. And that means the person who is barreling along and not realizing the chaos they're leaving in their wake. And then you have the wavy line, who is the Robert coming along behind her, trying to frantically pick up the pieces and reacting to her. So, for example, like there's that moment where she makes the dresses out of the curtains. Mm-hmm. Pretty funny. Come in. She's wearing curtains. We don't really laugh, though, until we see Robert's reaction.
Did you cut up my curtains?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the moment we laugh.
Yeah. I think maybe the most famous example is That's How You Know, which is the musical number, which I really like. But you have Gisele singing a song and then suddenly everyone starts to join in, and the whole way through Robert is like, why are these people singing?
I think like right at the beginning, she's like, how does she know that you love her? And then the other guy joins in with the next line and he's like, wait, he knows the song too? And then they all, like the group starts singing and he's like, I've literally never heard this song. I want to talk a little bit about this number.
Hey guys, me and Ibby disagreed on something. Oh. It doesn't happen often, but we did.
We're 10 episodes in, it finally happened. I think the How Does She Know Central Park number is I don't think it's as funny as the cleaning song. I'll start there because I don't think it's as truthful. So the cleaning song, we laugh at that because Gisele has called out for the animals. And she's gotten roaches, rats, and pigeons to help her clean. But she works with that. But then when it becomes very funny is when Morgan comes out and then she goes and gets her dad. And she's like, Dad, come look. And he's like, ah! And he's like picking up rats and like getting rid of roaches. That's funny to watch. Central Park, I think, takes it a little bit too far. I think, we've established that Gisele can talk to animals. We do that in the animated world. But I don't think we've kind of established that she can get an entire choreographed sing-along song in Central Park to happen. And it feels like it just kind of breaks the world a little bit too much for me. And so for me, I'm like, this, it's a feel-good, it's a fun song. It's a very fun song. Like, I love the song. But it doesn't feel as real. And I don't think his reaction is as effective because I think it breaks its own rules a little bit too much.
So here's the thing. I actually do agree with most of that logic. I think I don't care because it's my favorite part of the movie. It is a good example, though, of another good thing this movie does. And good advice for comedy. I actually discovered this doing my own web series, which Ibby is currently editing, called Codependent. One joke per scene. And escalate the joke. This is kind of like a microcosm of have the comic premise lie once and then be honest. Mm-hmm. So the cleaning song. The joke is that she needs animal friends to help her and she gets New York vermin. Yeah. There's no other joke. It just builds and it escalates. And they build on that and they're like, we can have rats scrubbing the dishes and roaches cleaning the bathtub and it's gross, but it's funny.
And they use toilets to clean, toothbrushes to clean the toilet. Yeah. And the pigeon can't carry a plate and it drops a plate.
So it's just building on the premise. Yeah. And that's how I think why I like it is because it starts off with the premise of like, what if Gisele starts singing and everyone joins in and Robert doesn't get it? If you go back and watch that sequence, there's no jokes in that sequence. There's no point where anyone is trying to be funny. You're laughing or at least delighted because it just builds to such ridiculous proportions. Yeah. And it's the entirety of Central Park by the end who joins in.
When did we all learn this choreography? Yeah. No, I will settle on, I think it's a good moment. I don't think it breaks the story enough to ruin the movie. And like, it is kind of the,
It's her princess song.
Yeah, it's, it's the one that's going to carry the movie through all of its marketing and everything. So I totally get it. And again, I don't think it breaks it enough to ruin the movie. But I do think if you compare the two songs, this one doesn't land as much as the cleaning song.
I do like the cleaning song.
It is a lot of fun. It's just a fun scene.
In the script, it's just referred to as the Whistle While You Work song, which is the one from Snow White. Happy Working Song, that's the title. Sing a happy working song. So we've established we have characters who act honestly and play off each other. And then
characters to react.
And to react honestly.
Yes.
And not be over the top. No. With reacting, sometimes them just seeing something is enough. Yeah. That is it.
Because I think psychologically, like just watching someone else react gives us permission to react, right? So like
definitely
seeing the person react, just seeing the person see the silly thing is what allows us to laugh and kind of breaks down the wall that might stop us from laughing. Like The Nice Guys, for a very different comedy movie, but did this all the time. Like someone was always the reactor. Often Healy, you've got to have that person.
Are we ready to talk about the third act?
I think so. I think so. And now we get serious.
Now we do get serious. We get to what I termed the non-funny comedic third act.
The third act isn't very funny.
No, it's not.
It's not bad. It's a good third act.
It's still comedic. It's just not funny.
Yeah. It wraps up all their arcs. It does everything a third act needs to do.
And it doesn't need to be funny. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Mm-hmm. So basic 3-act structure. Act 1, it sets up the premise. Gisele gets sent to New York. We are basically told the lie of the world. And we're like, okay, I'm here for this. Mm-hmm. Act 2 explores the premise, develops the characters. This is where most of the comedy happens. Kaplan mentions in his book, if you have a good comedic premise, situations really should just write themselves. And having like a Disney princess come into our world, especially New York, and be real, leads to so many amazing comedic scenes. And then we get to Act 3. So this is the Bull and the Dragon.
Yep.
So Aristotle basically defined theatre, and I am very simplifying this, in 2 genres. There's drama, which has a sad ending, and there's comedy, which has a happy ending. And this movie definitely has a happy ending. But in order to get to the happy ending, we have to have some characters complete their arcs and be sad for a little bit. So we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, so third act, Nerissa comes into the city. They're at the ball. Gisele has sort of done her makeover, has kind of undergone her transformation, and has become the modern woman at the ball. How did you phrase it? How did the script phrase it?
The script phrased it, the only modern woman in a room full of fairy tale characters.
Yeah.
I read the script, it's so well done. Also, her fairy godmother being Morgan and a pair of fairy wings and a credit card.
Amazing. That's all you need.
It's for emergencies. This definitely qualifies as an emergency.
And I think that's part of the reason the third act isn't as funny or as silly as the other acts, is that Gisele has actually kind of settled into the world that she's in. She is still herself. Like, she's not broken character, but she has kind of become the modern woman. And so all of a sudden, actually, she's not doing things that give us the reactions to laugh at. Instead, actually, we start to see a very serious side of her that is in love with Robert. And we start to see Robert, who is now realizing he's in love with her. And he's the one who realizes that it's true love's kiss that will, save her.
Yeah, so this film, obviously a parody of the early Disney princess films. No parody in the scene I'm about to talk about, which is the dance scene between Gisele and Robert. This is such a corny scene. Nothing is spared and it works. I don't think this could work in any other movie. They're dancing, they're in the middle of the room, and the rest of the characters are kind of around them for whatever reason that does not make any sense. There's lights, there's a soppy love song playing, and then Robert leans in and sings to her. Oh, that's so sappy just describing it, but it works on screen and you're for it.
It's such a beautiful moment.
Yeah.
And Amy Adams. Oh.
Actually, this is, I wrote this down because it was in the screenplay and I loved it. And the line to describe it was, Beauty and the Beast, Cinderella, The King and I, all the greatest romantic dancing moments in the history of great romantic dance moments suddenly finding their successor in these two.
It's a great script.
It's such a good script. So they have the dance and you're like, oh wow, and you're really rooting for them. And then it does this very clever thing where you see Nancy and Edward are also dancing together and they dance past them and they're watching them and they are both heartbroken. It's a really sad moment and it ties into the theme of the film. Again, I think it could have been very easy to just make this film about believe in fairy tale love and you'll be happy. It's not about that. It's about recognizing that true love, or what we refer to as like fairy tale love, does exist. You just have to fight for it and you have to work for it, and it's hard. You can get there, but you don't meet them on day one and then get married. You have to keep working. And I think this shows this. But yes, Gisele and Robert are in love, but it's going to have consequences.
Yeah.
They're going to hurt these two people that they really care about. I think that goes back to making Nancy and Edward feel like real characters.
Yeah, because we're actually able to feel for them. You're kind of heartbroken as you watch Nancy and Edward react, because you're like, we want Rob and Gisele together, but also you guys don't deserve this. Like, that sucks and that's so hard, and that's good writing because that's making us feel something as an audience.
And I think in comedies, you can go there because the audience has let their guard down because you've made them laugh. And they're more willing to accept kind of like the sappy dance scene and the feelings that are going to come. And the sadder scene in the movie, which is when Nerissa shows up disguised as the hag with an apple.
Yeah.
And offers to make Gisele forget everything and just go back to Andalusia with Edward. And we know that's the wrong ending and she chooses it anyway. It's sad. And it's contrasted with that early scene where Nerissa tries the same trick with the wishing well. And she's like, oh, look into it, dearie, and all your wishes will come true. And it's very silly and cartoony. I'm like, yeah. It's pretty much the same scene with an apple. But this, I don't know. I really, really felt the choice she had to make there. It's a hard choice.
It's a hard choice, but it showed how much she had grown to like have experienced love that wasn't just the sort of instantly like, oh, you're my prince and we're going to get married tomorrow. Like,
oh, Gisele, we shall be married in the morning.
It was a genuine love that she's been able to experience for like the first time, and she has to choose to leave that. That's an intense choice to have in a kids' comedy movie.
Yeah.
What the heck? Side note, I love that the host at the ball is like, now everyone grab someone you didn't come with, and then they play like the most sappy romantic love song. Guys.
And it's called like the King and Queen's Waltz. So I'm like, surely that would be...
This is a terrible song choice. Who is running this event?
It's one of the things you like, I noticed that and I don't care.
You forgive it.
It's forgiven. I think that's the way to frame it. But it's still comedic. Why is it comedic? Because it has a happy ending.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to do that by proving that the characters have come to the end of their arc and prove the thesis. Robert comes to the end of his arc by accepting true love, by showing true love's kiss.
Yeah.
He kisses Gisele awake, she comes awake. Gisele ends her arc. So when I'm describing the third act, and I say it's not comedic, it is still a woman in a ball gown scaling a building with a sword to rescue her true love from a giant dragon / queen.
And like, Queen Nerissa does get some fun lines in that.
Also,
like,
she's fun. She can tell jokes. She's the villain. She's allowed to.
Guess that makes you the damsel in distress.
I love that line.
Such a great line.
Over my dead body. All right, I'm flexible.
But no, it's Gisele who has to go save
Robert.
Yeah.
So, again, the one lie you get to believe and everything else, to be honest, that's a ridiculous and comedic situation. You don't need your characters to be trying to be funny. Also, it's the third act, it's the climax. We're there.
Yeah.
We're with you. You don't need to make us laugh for us to be with these characters. And that completes Gisele's arc because it's like, yes, I still believe in true love. I'm just going to fight for it now instead of just falling into someone's arms and accepting that. And then it does...
And she has to catch someone else this time.
Yes, and then it pays off the catching joke, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Rule of 3. So one time with Edward to set it up, one time with Robert to be funny, one time at the end...
To show growth. It's a very well-structured movie. Like,
Yes.
It's not breaking new writing ground, but it's a well-structured, well-written screenplay and story.
Yeah, it's a funny movie with characters you root for, scenes you want to revisit, and it ties up all the loose ends. Nathaniel goes on to be a serious author with his book.
As does Chip.
And does Chip. And Nancy and Edward end up together.
Yeah.
I think that was such a nice twist as well. Again, so I've mentioned this, but like making Nancy three-dimensional. It was kind of nice to realise that she also wanted fairy tale love and like Robert had settled for someone who was practical. And like that choice to be like, Robert isn't against love. He still wants to marry Nancy and he cares for her. It's just a practical choice for him. It's not the sweeping fairy tale love he finds with Gisele.
And he talks to Gisele about this, like the fact that he's like, sure, we might love each other now, but who's to say that the feelings are still going to be there, in like 2 weeks or in a year or whatever. And that's, true to what his character has experienced. But yeah, it does feel nice for Nancy that she kind of because it almost feels like Robert needs someone grounded, but needs a bit of that true love as well. Whereas Nancy's kind of like baseline is the grounded, but she actually kind of wants the fairy tale.
She's so thrilled when he invites her to the ball.
Yeah, or when, Gisele helps, but when
Gisele
flowers,
technically does it, but
when Gisele sends flowers on Robert's behalf, right? Like, those kind of things actually really kind of awaken something in her. Yeah, interesting side characters. Who would have thought that would make for a good movie?
And honest side characters.
Yeah.
Should we do some takeaways?
Takeaways.
Yeah, my biggest takeaway from this was the thing that sent me on this journey in the first place and made me revisit Enchanted, which is in comedy, you get to lie once and then everything else has to be honest. And if your comedic premise is strong enough, you don't have to fill your script with like jokes and slapstick and like silly characters. You just need characters reacting and acting honestly in situations. Actors shouldn't be trying to be funny. The writer shouldn't be trying to be funny. You should just be honest.
And the situation will let you be funny.
Yeah. Your takeaways.
I've really only got one. I think mine, like, there's that. I feel like that was my takeaway from The Nice Guys. But I think one of the other things is actually going back to just the juxtaposition between Robert and Gisele. And, like, being really intentional about who are your characters and how do they conflict. We're both in a writing group together, and one of the pieces of writing advice I was given for one of my scripts that has kind of stuck with me is the idea of basically make the characters more different. If your characters are dealing with similar issues, so in this case, Gisele and Robert are both dealing with the issue of love and the idea of what love means and marriage means, but they are entirely worlds apart in how they approach those two things, and you force those characters together, that actually leads to a lot of humor.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And they lived happily ever after.
Thanks for joining us. If you like this episode and want to hear more, make sure to hit that subscribe button and click the bell to receive notifications. We have upcoming episodes on John Wick, The Platform, and Schitt's Creek. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or write to us at killthecatpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, this has been Kill the Cat.
Yeah. I feel like that's our target audience.
The writers from Disney are not listening to our podcast for advice. It makes sense. Like...